Hi boys, so today I have a very different video for you guys, and this is a video that, disclaimer, everything I say and think is less valuable than what LS says and thinks about the game, so fucking check out his content before mine. A lot of the ideas have been taken from his podcasts and stuff, and of course like some other stuff as well. But we're gonna go through a couple of things, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the buff to Garen and the general buffs to champions in the last couple of patches. If you guys are at any point just a little bit keeping up with what is going on in League of Legends, then you surely have heard that, well, new patches have been weird. And one of the reasons why that seems to have been the case is that these new patches are just adjusting very minor things, and there's no like big change there, right? So one recent big change that would, for example, come to mind would be the point of Heimerdinger. Right? Where Heimerdinger used to be a support champion that used to be played all the time, or Ashe as well. They used to be champions that were played all the time, and then they got kind of nerfed, right? And everyone was like, damn, well shit, you know, that's a problem. Like, the Heimerdinger is nerfed, we're not really playing him anymore because he's just nerfed and he's worse. And then you look at what got nerfed, and like, at the end of the day, the nerfs weren't that big of an issue for the way that people played Heimerdinger, right? Heimerdinger was used as this like counter pusher and things like that, and realistically you were hard pressed to find examples where the buff would actually hurt him and stuff. People still stopped playing him, and this is exactly the point that I want to talk about. And again, this is taken from an LS kind of podcast with Max Waldo. Go ahead and go to the official LS channel and check that out. It's absolutely worth the watch. Got a million concepts. I watched it to go to sleep yesterday, and I stayed up until 3 o'clock because I found like the concepts in there very interesting. And so what I wanted to talk about a bit today is how changes impact the video game, and how I have made really big mistakes in, you know, past casts as well, of just absolutely cringing the analysis of changes or generally of champions, right? And that has been a good example of that can be, for example, Eclipse, right? So we look at Eclipse, the item. And Eclipse, the item, is a item that seems like it is very good against tanks, right? Because it has that bonus damage and has that armor shred that is percent and not like lethality, which is flat. And for anyone who doesn't know how that works, is basically flat is better the less armor you have, where percent is better the more armor the target has. Not you, but the target that you're targeting, right? So like lethality, more optimal against low HP targets. And then you might say, but why do you need armor pen against low HP targets that have less armor? Just build more damage. And yeah, lethality is basically more damage, and that's exactly the point. Where armor pen, of course, right, works pretty well versus the Malphite that has like 800 armor because of his fucking passive, like stacked on top of, you know, a million HP as well. Of course not going to be so good against your like average 40 armor mage, right? So the thing that we can talk about here is that Prowler's Claw. You look at Prowler's Claw and you go, okay, that's an assassin item that is used versus squishies. There are very limited times where Eclipse, if we not factor in the shield, right, where Eclipse provides more damage versus tanks, and we're talking about like high percent HP tanks, right, then Prowler's Claw does. And you might say, well, Ashen, what the fuck? Like, that's not supposed to be that way. Yeah, right. But you look at the item and you go, yeah, percent and not percent, right? You go like, okay, this is percent armor, this is like flat lethality, so I built this versus this, I built this versus this. But not until you go into the game and you check out whether or not what Riot is proposing with those numbers is actually also the case, will you ever find out that, for example, that is not the case, right? A really good example as well would be Kraken Slayer on Jhin, right? This kind of goes into a similar topic where, for example, this was like a video that I've watched quite a while ago now by Vigar V2, right? He talked about like Jhin itemization and stuff, where basically on Jhin, was it Vigar? I don't know. Where basically Kraken Slayer ends up being more damage than any other mythic on Jhin. And you're like, what? And not only that, but it also gives you much more movement speed. You're like, what the fuck? And these are things that you test, and then in hindsight you can explain, oh yeah, this is why. And for example, with Prowler's Claw, we can say, oh, Prowler's Claw is just that fucking broken. Now, why is Prowler's Claw that broken? The stats it gives are very stat efficient. That's number one. Number two, 15% increased damage is a incredibly valuable thing to have, and something that a lot of items can't, like, do not even offer, right? Because Eclipse never gonna do 15 bonus percent flat on top of your stuff for a certain amount of seconds, right? And the bonus damage can be really, really great, right? If you're fighting certain targets. And that is a thing that makes Prowler's Claw so good, is that it has so many things going for it, but one thing is that the stats are just so much greater than the stats that other items offer, that you end up at a higher point, even though it is technically giving you less efficient stats, but it gives you more stats, so you still end up at a higher point. And these things you will never find out until you actually figure it out, right? And I've been very, very lazy with that kind of stuff. Of course, I spend a lot of time doing a lot of things. But, you know, like just walking into the practice tool and like playing around with numbers, I've never done, right? I have, of course, like whenever I play champion, I check out all the item options. I check out the HP values and the breakpoints at which I like expect the thing to be better or worse. But this is something that we need to be all very, very considerate of, that there is this like layer of like, okay, this item is good or not good. And then there's this bigger layer of like, or there's a layer of like situational item, and then there's the point of like, wait, but this item is just like still better because it is more gold efficient or what have you. And a good example, like LS always has these kind of points, right? The Morello point, the Black Cleaver instead of, which by the way, Black Cleaver got even buffed then, but the Black Cleaver instead of the what's the anti-heal item? Chemtech Putrefier? No, that's the support item. Chainsaw, Chemtech Chainsaw Sword or something. That item used to be built first item on champions like the Vi. Now it's not, because Black Cleaver is better. And Black Cleaver was better already. Pre-buffs and then got buffed even more, and so people are playing it now. But the important point here being that, of course, like not everyone runs the numbers and goes like, okay, so how much healing are we actually reducing? How much damage is that healing reduction actually going to give us? And then you end up at a certain point where you figure out like, oh, well, Black Cleaver, like in 99 situations out of 100, is just going to be more efficient. And so we have all of those like little things that, of course, I have never considered very well and I've not thought about. So the thing that I'm going to try to make work, and this is difficult because I record like 3 to 5 videos each day, is to try to dive a little bit deeper into the builds and the topics at hand, right? But this is of course also very difficult as I try to cover all lanes. I don't, you know, specialize on only mid or only AD. So of course that's like a very big pool. If you have anything where you think, oh, I made a mistake, like Ashen made a mistake, and he's like completely oblivious to this point, please tell me in the comments. I absolutely fucking love constructive feedback. Matter of fact, I'm probably capable of like pulling out some constructive feedback even out of like the most flamey and toxic comments. So, you know, I absolutely love it. The next thing here is we are actually watching a game of League of Legends. And it is Garen versus a Cassandra. Now, this lane hasn't been the most amazing, thrilling lane that you've ever seen. So far we've gone on a solo podcast. However, from now on, we're going to look a little bit more under the hood of this build out of Gabun King. Why? Because the Galeforce is in his inventory. Which means, you know, that's not an item that you see on Garen all the time. So it opens up exactly that conversation, right? And in good old me fashion, I obviously haven't run the numbers on how efficient Galeforce is. However, we can have a very interesting conversation on Galeforce value, because it's always very hard to put value onto movement spells, because you can't just take like you can't just say, oh yeah, okay, so Galeforce helps you dodge this or helps you get rid of Here we can't say, okay, well, Garen would not have been able to take down Ahri without the Galeforce, right? And what you can say to that as an answer is yes. However, he never needs to, right? Because he expends too many resources anyway to kill Ahri and ends up going down anyway. However, and this is the thing, is like, okay, so first of all, we need to check whether or not, of course, he would have like another item. He would be able to do the same thing, right? So like, does he lose enough damage on Galeforce? The other thing is, of course, Galeforce gives you movement speed, which like movement speed is one of these things that are kind of like, that can feel very intangible, because you're like, okay, what does movement speed do? I move faster on the map. How do you quantify like faster moving on the map? Do I get 1 minion more? Do I get to a play faster and get 1 more Q out of the team fight, right? Situations like this. However, and I've been thinking about this a lot, because Galeforce generally is a topic that I find very interesting, because a lot of people don't play Viego. A lot of like Viego players don't play Viego with Galeforce. They always play Kraken Slayer, and Kraken Slayer is absolutely amazing. However, depending on the game, I found that sometimes I spend so little time as Viego that Kraken Slayer can benefit me, but the Galeforce, for example, allows me to transform and save much more HP. Like, get to that transform quicker, save more HP, or threaten targets in a situation where I wasn't able to before, right? So, like, the classic example would be a Caitlyn that is sitting behind traps, right? And you can only do so much with the positioning that you're in. Now, I've been thinking about this a lot, because I believe that my positioning is also just very subpar in comparison, because I'm a control mage player, and I have that positioning down much better than I have front to back positioning. I have that down very well. However, I tend to struggle with the flank positioning and that kind of stuff, which is why I've been spamming a lot of champions like Fizz, like the Sylas, you know, like the Viego, like the Kiana lately, because I want to understand how and what this flank positioning does and how to achieve it, right? And so Galeforce could be, for example, just a little bit of a cheat, right? Where it's like, okay, well, I'm just using Galeforce as this crutch to be able to gap close where it wasn't necessary, right? However, and this is the other point, is like, okay, imagine TF with flash or without flash. That's quite the difference, right? And now let's say that Ignite was much, much more powerful, because at the moment, of course, Ignite not nearly is as powerful as something like Flash is, right? We can see that kind of from the difference of damage between Kraken Slayer and Galeforce, right? And how much Riot Games is valuing the movement ability there, right? Very long cooldown, little damage, and then you have Kraken Slayer with much, much more damage, especially much more consistent damage. And so you can see that, like, Riot is valuing this stuff very, very highly. And now the question becomes, okay, what if I was able to ignite like a 400 damage tick ignite? Equip a 400 damage tick ignite on my TF. And that, of course, changes things again. And that's kind of the discussion between Kraken Slayer and Galeforce often, right? Where on AD carries, for example, it doesn't really matter how much damage you deal. In this, like, ultimate sense, right? Where it's like, it doesn't really matter whether or not you deal through Kraken Slayer, like, 1,000 damage more at the end of the game, or like 3,000. Because it only matters, like, it depends, right? It only matters if that puts you at the point where you can, for example, shred a Scion, or get through, I don't know, like get through this other thing, right? But if you, like, accumulatively build like more, or get like more damage, but the more damage doesn't do anything, then it doesn't do any, like, then the damage is worse than, for example, a Galeforce, where you can say, okay, well, through the Galeforce I was able to position myself more aggressively, then go out of the fight and then enter it again, right? Things like that. Look at Lucian, right? Lucian's perfect Kraken Slayer user. My god. But Galeforce is just so ridiculous, because you have that E and the Galeforce. Together with the Nami, you're ridiculously strong with that, right? Now, are you going to use the same item with a Braum? Maybe not. Maybe you use a Kraken Slayer there, right? So, yeah. I think this is like a very interesting discussion to have, and we are obviously looking at the Garen build. And Garen is a very interesting and, like, specific champion in that you find a lot of builds out of the mains. You find a lot of builds that look counterintuitive, right? Because you're expecting, like, this is a bruiser. He wants to run at people. He wants to fight. And he wants some HP, and he wants some resistances. But oftentimes you find the Garen players actually not really buy a lot of resistances, right? And Galeforce here is another one of these situations where, like, Garen doesn't have a lot of resistances. A lot of the resistances that this Garen has come from the fact that he is level 13, which is above everyone except Ahri. And the fact that he, of course, has his W scaling and so on. And has this W, has this reduction. And then will just have to pick his time to fight, right? And so he's not a Scion that walks into 5 people and creates chaos. And so Galeforce, as you can see there, super good at catching people out. Super good at catching people out and out of position, right? You saw it there again. Unfortunately, he got kited around. He, you know, didn't expect to not kill the Heimerdinger here. Could have been able to run out of this. Would have been able to do something there. He is building a lot of items that are based around the fact that he can punish the Cassandra here. And I don't know if this build is perfect. However, Garens are a good like way to test item builds, because Garen doesn't really have a lot of different mechanics going on for himself, and you can't really play him very differently, right? If you have one Garen main, he plays pretty much like another Garen main, just because Garen just has those options, right? And of course that's like not in the macro sense true, but it's much less stylistically different, right? So people of course are building the crit because it can work with the E and so on and so forth, and that's been going on for now quite a while. And here you see him play LDR. Actually, he is playing Lord Dominic's Regards together with the Galeforce here, building a kind of crit assassin type playstyle on the Garen, as Garen is of course, because of his mechanics, is able to stay on lane a lot, able to soak up a lot of CS, and so these kind of crit builds often work out like surprisingly well on him, right? And of course, Lord Dominic's Regards very good against tanks like the Kesante, who as a Garen you can struggle with killing because, well, you know, the guy just has a lot of HP. And as here, the teleport will come out of Yukal. I mean, I don't really have very high hopes for the Garen. He will ult very early and yeah, we'll just be taken down. Yukal though, using the stopwatch here, is also building Everfrost Banshee's Veil into Zhonya and still dealing damage, which I don't quite understand how that is possible, but I guess it is just the level lead that will carry here. And of course, since we're in a YouTube video, we can't really see anything because the camera isn't moving. That's fun. Absolutely love it. But we're gonna see how this build does, because like Garen oftentimes also, because of these squishy builds, struggles very hard in team fights. And so I'm not sure that this Garen build is necessarily that optimal unless you have a specialized playstyle that you want to engage in, right? If you have a plan, if you go, okay, yeah, but I want to split push all the time, want to demolish all the camps, get all the money, and then just like Galeforce in, silence someone, and then kill them in the duration of the silence, right? You just run at them, you Galeforce them, and you just catch them out of off guard with it, or just they just have to like give you the Q because they can't do anything, and then you kill them in that time, right? That seems to be the theme here of the build. And the question is like, versus how many champions does this work here, right? As of course Jhin has a Galeforce of its own, so you could kind of say it's an equalizer of tools for Jhin, but then Jhin often uses this tool more offensively than defensively. So that is something that is very interesting. Also, of course, Galeforce could help you get closer to an Ahri. However, I believe that this is never going to happen realistically, because Ahri's cooldown on a double ultimate, like R into R, is way too low. So I don't think that is going to be possible to silence her and prevent her from ulting there. And then, of course, the Galeforce, this is the point, like, is very good at securing kills that you don't quite get, which can happen a lot if you're being kited around as a Garen. You can see here, he isn't really engaging with the Heimerdinger because he knows that if he walks into all the traps, then he just dies. Now that all the traps are down, because we can play this a little bit differently. And you can see, by the way, that here he is still reasonably tanky, and this is a little bit of a specialty of Garen, is the fact that, you know, you are reasonably tanky even when building these items, which is very interesting. As now he's going to be level 15. I think he's now even ahead of Yukal here, who with his build is not going to be scaling too well in these fights. I mean, Ahri tends to struggle with... No, he's still on same level. Ahri tends to struggle a lot anyhow. But... yeah. Okay, So here now we have the Dead Man's Plate. And I think this is like another thing about this build that we can also talk about. Is the fact that this build has a lot of movement speed, right? And one thing that you absolutely love as a side laner is movement speed, because it allows you to be at place, yet still pressure. It allows you to get into the enemy jungle, for example, right? And so as a pretty reasonably strong split pusher that Garen is, like, of course, he's not going to be a Jax or Fiora or Tryndamere. But as a reasonably good split pusher, you can tell that, like, the movement speed is just so valuable here, right? Look at how quickly he just strides on over into the mid lane here. Taking him what? Like, it's here at 14. Dude, it takes him like... That's actually crazy. It takes him 16 seconds. Like, usually it takes a champion like 20 to 25 to 30 even. To get there. Which is just crazy. I mean, assuming that top and bottom are the same, but I think so. And yeah, you can see here that he just plays this in a very assassin-y way. Will take down the Jhin, but through the LDR, still able to stand his own. Goes for a lot of burst damage here, of course, with the Dead Man's Plate as well, of course, right? Dead Man's Plate, quite the good one at that. Because you get that bonus movement speed and that bonus damage on hit, which of course works very well with how Garen wants to kill you. Just press Q on you and then E a little bit and then R. And you can see that, he's very good at doing that and kind of taking away the counterplay from the Jhin, who in this case just didn't react fast enough, got silenced, and then, it's all for nothing. So yeah. The reason I selected this gameplay as well is because I'm very into the Galeforce thing, because I do this on Aphelios as well, and I'm just kind of trying to collect some data as well. And of course, because like I can't like cast, then review games as well, because I, like imagine I cast like minimum 2 videos per day, of course. But most of the time it's 3+ videos. Then you add to that the fact that, of course, I want to do things like practice League or, have to do physical exercise, have to eat. Then I want to try and stream like every day with like a couple of days break maybe, right? Then you want to do a couple of other things. Have to do some studying. Yeah, want to do as well. And it's just like, at that point the time's gone. So yeah, you're gonna be part of my inquisition into the Galeforce item a little bit more. And I think Garen is running rapid fire cannon. Yeah. I think it's like just here, I think this is a build that is just specifically created around the fact that your goal is to be able to apply that Q as quickly as possible, right? Galeforce in, apply that Q as quickly as possible, and then press up. And as you can see, of course, he can duel the Cassandra as well, as he has Lord Dominic's Regards, which is just very good at dealing damage to the enemy. Alright, well, GG, thank you very much for watching, and if you made it to this point, of course, you will probably want to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any suggestions for me, then please throw them into the comments, and also tell me what you would like, or how you would like a Patreon for me. And if you have any ideas of what we could do as a Patreon reward. So with that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay awesome.